We're travelling around the world again this week and virtually visiting 10 national parks that we'd love to see in person one day. So why not travel with us and improve your English in this episode of
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And together with nearly 50 years of teaching English between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. How are you doing, Reza?
I'm feeling good, Craig, and I'm ready to set out on our virtual journey.
Well, I can see you've got your suitcase ready and it's packed. You're wearing your hat, your sunglasses. Let's go, man. But before we go, wait a minute. We've got a voice message from our friend Carolina from Argentina who gave us the idea for today's topic.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Greg. I am Carolina from San Juan, Argentina. I am very, very grateful with the last podcast about the entrepreneurs that are changing the world. Thank you very much. And I was thinking about a new interesting issue for a next podcast, and it could be about the national parks that we have around the world, or maybe only the national parks that are in Spain and the United Kingdom, or the most famous ones. Well, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Carolina, for sending us another message because we've heard from you before. It's always a pleasure to get your messages. Any comments on her message, Reza?
It was a very nice message. Thank you, Carolina. And I thought that your pronunciation in general was very good. But did you find any word which could perhaps be improved upon as regards pronunciation, Craig?
Yes, there was one word that you need to improve a little bit, Carolina. That's entrepreneur. Now, it's a difficult word. It's a French word, but we've anglicized it, so we say it in English quite often. Entrepreneur. Entrepreneur. That's 4 syllables, isn't it? Entrepreneur. Entrepreneur. Keep repeating it. Follow our pronunciation. Let's just check with Reza that he doesn't have a Belfast difference with those vowel sounds.
Probably a slight difference, but not much.
So let me say it first. Entrepreneur.
Entrepreneur.
Yeah, pretty much the same, Carolina. Just copy that and you'll be fine. Any other comments, Reza?
I understood absolutely everything you said, Carolina. Therefore, that was a very good message. However, there are a couple of points of vocabulary that could be improved. You said you were grateful with, but the preposition with doesn't collocate with grateful. It's grateful for our podcast, and thank you very much. And you said a next podcast. The word "a" never goes with next. It's the next. So the next podcast. But don't worry, they're not very big mistakes, but if we can help you improve, fantastic.
And we loved your idea, Carolina, but we're not going to speak about national parks specifically in the UK. We're just going to give you 10 parks that Reza and I would really, really like to see. So I've made a list of 5. Reza has made a list of 5. And we'll share our dreams and ambitions with you and give you some information about these 10 national parks. So it's me first, isn't it?
Go ahead.
So one park I'd love to see is the Yellowstone National Park, which is in the US. It's in the western side of the United States, and it's mainly in the state of Wyoming, but it also goes into Montana and Idaho. And it was founded way back in 1872. Now, regular listeners of the podcast will remember that word founded because we have used it quite a lot. To found something is to start it. So a business could be founded, for example, or a product could be founded. It's the beginning of something. And the national park was founded in 1872, and it was the first national park in the US and possibly in the world. So a very old national park. And one thing I would love to see is a geyser which is called Old Faithful. It's a geothermal feature that erupts every 90 minutes and sends lots of water up into the air to a height of 56 meters, up to 56 meters. So I'd love to see that. And that's a feature of the national park. Have you ever seen any geysers?
I've seen on TV clips of Old Faithful, very famous geyser, and I'd love to see that myself.
The park itself is centered over the Yellowstone caldera, which is a dormant volcano. In fact, it's the largest super volcano on the American continent. And this national park is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's got some incredible animals that you could see there. There are grizzly bears walking around, wolves, and herds of bison and elk also live in the park. And an elk, E-L-K, it's a kind of big deer, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's bigger than a normal deer.
With huge antlers coming out of its head. And in the winter, of course, it snows because of where it is, and you can travel around the park by snowmobile, which sounds like a lot of fun. So that's one park I'd really love to visit.
For my first choice, so this is number 2 on the list because Craig's doing 5 and I'm doing 5. We're going to another continent. We're going to Kruger National Park. Now that's in the northeastern part of South Africa. So it borders the countries of Mozambique and Zimbabwe, but Kruger Park itself is in South Africa. Now perhaps it's most famous because of the fact that it has the Big Five. It's one of the few places on Earth, in fact, to have the Big Five.
What are the Big Five?
Well, the Big Five are 5 animals which are rare and endangered. There aren't many left. Elephants, rhinos, lions, leopards, and buffaloes, all in their wild varieties. So you can find them in their natural habitat in Kruger National Park. That's not so surprising if I tell you that it has no fewer than 14 different ecozones. An ecozone is a zone, an area with its own ecosystem. So there are 14 in Kruger National Park, and they each have their own distinct wildlife. Obviously then, it's an excellent place for a safari and any type of wildlife spotting in general. To spot something means to see it and identify it. So people who are interested in wildlife, they try and spot particular creatures, animals that you don't normally see or they're hard to see or find in other places. You go wildlife spotting. And the more adventurous people who visit the park may even drive themselves through the park. So there aren't many national parks in the world where you're permitted to drive yourself, but you are in Kruger National Park, or you can even hike through it. Though if I were you...
Wait a second. Hiking is walking, and you've got leopards, lions, elephants, rhinos. Isn't it a bit dangerous?
It is. So,
but they let you do it.
They let you do it, but you'd better stick to the designated paths. Don't roam too far off the paths, or you could become some animal's breakfast. Yeah. So stay on the designated paths, but you can. And hopefully the lions and leopards and rhinos, etc., don't stray onto your path. Hopefully. The reason, by the way, that I would like to visit Kruger National Park is because my mum and dad have been, and also my brother, and they all loved it. They said it was fantastic, you must go. So that's why it's high up on my list.
Well, I know you like some animals, particularly the sloth that we've spoken about in past episodes, but are you really interested in wildlife and nature? Do you watch wildlife documentaries on the TV, for example?
I do. I don't go out of my way to watch them. I don't make a big effort, but when they're on, I generally enjoy them. I love finding out about the habits and the behavior of wild animals. And I'm particularly fond of elephants. So I'd love to go to Kruger National Park to see them.
The next one on my list is Yosemite National Park, which is in Northern California. Now, for years, I grew up thinking that Yosemite was pronounced Yosemite because it's Y-O-S-E-M-I-T-E. But with time, I realized I was pronouncing it wrong. It's Yosemite, and it's a World Heritage Site. It has granite cliffs. That's the type of rock in the park. It has waterfalls. It has clear streams. A stream is a small river. It has giant sequoia groves. And sequoia is the kind of trees that grow in this area. There are lakes, there are mountains, there are meadows, meadows. So a meadow is similar to a field, but there is a difference, isn't there, Reza? What's the difference between a meadow and a field?
Well, they're very similar, but for me, the difference is that a field is definitely something which is man-made. It's artificial. It might look very natural and you see it in nature, but it's being prepared by humans. It's used for, or has been used for, agriculture, or maybe animals which a farmer keeps are there. Whereas a meadow is generally natural, although it can be man-made, but it's not used for agriculture. So there could be flowers there, wild animals, but it's not specifically used for agricultural purposes.
And apart from the lovely features of the countryside, the meadows, the mountains, the lakes, the glaciers that this area has, it's also 95% wilderness. Now, if you look at that word wilderness, you'll notice that the first four letters are wild, W-I-L-D, wilderness. So very wild countryside, and I would love to see it. And also notice that the first two choices I have are in the Western US. I love going to North America. I would really enjoy visiting that part of the US and going to those parks. And there's more, because it's part of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. That's not the Sierra Nevada in Andalusia. There's another one in the Western US. So lots of high mountains in that area. And there's a park quite close, well, fairly close to Yosemite, called the Sequoia National Park. And in that park, there's the oldest tree in the world, the oldest known tree in the world. It's called the General Sherman tree. I have no idea why it's called the General Sherman tree, but have a guess, Reza. How old do you think the oldest tree in the world could be?
I know that they say in Spain there's some olive trees, and Greece and Italy which can be about 1,000 years old. So if this is the oldest, what could it be? What, 2,000 years old?
You're not far off. It's actually a little older than that. They estimate around 2,300 up to 2,700 years old. One tree that goes back 700 BC to 300 BC before Christ. It's 84 meters high, which is really, really high, and it's 11 meters wide. So I would love to see that.
Let's come a bit closer to home for my next choice, and number 4 on our list. When I say closer to home, I mean where we are now, España, Spain. So my next choice is the Doñana National Park. And I imagine most of our Spanish listeners will know that it's located on the right bank. A bank is the side of a river, so you've got two banks. It's on the right bank of the river Guadalquivir, and it's around the estuary, that's La Ria, the estuary, on the Atlantic Ocean. It's not Mediterranean, on the Atlantic Ocean in Andalusia, Spain. And it's very near North Africa. So it's in Europe, but it's very near North Africa, and that's very relevant. It's a World Heritage Centre, and it's one of Europe's most important wetlands reserves. Wetlands, as you can probably guess, is land which tends to be wet. So it's not sea or not a lake, it's land, but it's wet. There's a lot of water there. Yeah, you might say humedal, perhaps in Spanish. And remember, it's very near North Africa. So it's a major site for migrating birds. So birds come from North Africa and from other parts of the world, and they tend to stop in Doñana. Remember years ago when you traveled, quite often you did a stopover? You had to stay for a half a day or a day in a place before you got your next plane. That's Doñana National Park for lots of birds. They do their stopover there. And the reason is it's known for its variety of habitats. So it suits lots of tastes of different birds. It's got lagoons, it's got marshlands, Yeah, so we had the word wetlands, marshlands, land with marsh. It's kind of similar. You might say marisma. Yeah, so everybody who knows about it in Andalusia knows about las marismas from Doñana. Yeah, the marshlands. Dunes, that's a similar word in Spanish. Lots of sand. And woodland, land with woods on it, with forests. And those different types of habitat, they provide shelter, protection for a range of endangered bird species. So that's what makes it very important in Europe as a national park.
I was really quite surprised when I read that you'd put this on your list, that you hadn't visited it yet, because I know you go to Alicante from time to time. How far do you think it is from Alicante? Could you drive there in 4 or 5 hours, do you think?
I think it would take about 5 hours, yeah, because it's right down in the south, almost on the border with Portugal.
The southern point, and over to the west.
So you
southwest.
can't get much further away.
Yeah.
So from Valencia, it's going to take you, I think, at least about 7 hours to get there.
Possibly more.
Maybe 8.
Yeah.
But worth it, vale la pena.
Now, Reza, have you heard of the Komodo dragon?
Yes.
You have?
I've heard of the dragon.
Well, in Indonesia, there's a national park called the Komodo National Park. It was founded, there's that word again, it was founded in 1980 specifically to protect the Komodo dragon community that lived there. It's the world's largest lizard. I think in Spanish, if you're a Spanish speaker, it's lagarto. And there are 3 main islands, the islands of Komodo, of course, Padar and Rinca. And that area of Indonesia is actually the driest part of the country. It's quite a volcanic, dry area where they live. And these dragons, these lizards, they can grow up to 3 meters long. That's 10 feet, Reza. Can you imagine a lizard that's 10 feet long? It's like Jurassic Park. It's like looking at dinosaurs. And these, they weigh up to 70 kilograms. They're absolutely enormous. And the way they kill their prey, that's prey, P-R-E-Y, the animals that they eat, is they bite them and they have toxic proteins in their mouth and also an anticoagulant. So the animals bleed to death and die of poison. I can just imagine them having really, really bad breath that they need like a mouthwash or peppermints or something. They're really unusual because they tend to hunt in groups. They hunt their prey in groups, which is unusual for lizards, and they occasionally attack humans. So you can't get too close. You must keep your distance. And I've never been to Indonesia, so that's another big reason for going to see the Komodo dragons.
Now, Craig, I didn't know there was a Komodo National Park. That's really interesting. I had heard of the animal because, as you asked me earlier about do I watch wildlife documentaries, that's where I found out about it.
Yep.
So I knew about the giant lizard, but I didn't know that it had a whole national park dedicated to it. That is interesting. Mm-hmm. And I knew about it biting you, and yeah, what they do is they bite you and then they go away.
Yeah,
they wait for you to die.
They leave you.
I'll come back in a couple of hours when you're dead.
Yeah, you'll be dead because you'll bleed out and you'll also die of poisoning. So, yeah, very dangerous animals. I would also love to see Indonesia. I think it must be a beautiful country, lovely beaches and nice people and good food. So that's definitely on my list, my top 10 list.
Now, it's on my list as well. Remember that Craig and I are doing 5 each on this list of top 10, but maybe we would share some of our choices.
All of them, yeah.
All of them. I would love to go to Yellowstone, Yosemite and Komodo myself. They would be on my top 10 as well.
Except one that you've chosen that you haven't mentioned yet that I've seen.
Is it the next one perhaps?
No, it's not.
Okay. I thought it might be the next one because the next one that I'm choosing is in England. Yes, England. So far we've been in very exotic places. For us, England is not so exotic, but I think the Lake District National Park would be an amazing place. Have you not been there, Craig?
I've been through it, but I haven't stayed there too long, but it is a beautiful area. I've driven through it on the way to Scotland, and it is lovely. Lots of lakes and beautiful countryside, very green, of course.
So you drove through it on the way to Scotland, exactly, because it's situated in the northwest of England. And It's called the Lake District because it's home to the country, or to England's principal lakes, including the largest lake in all of England, which is Lake Windermere. And also within the national park, you've got Scafell Pike, which is England's, not the UK's, but England's highest mountain. The highest mountain in the UK is Ben Nevis in Scotland, but England's highest mountain is also in the Lake District. So as you can imagine, it's a very rural, isolated area. Craig already mentioned the scenic views where you can see beautiful things, valleys, and it's well known for a thing which they call fells. F-E-L-L, a fell. Now, fells are barren. That means nothing really grows there. High altitude areas. Fells are very common in this part of England. They're not common all over England, but they are there. So you've got fells there.
Isn't there a sport or a pastime called fell running?
Yes, there is. People run through these high barren areas. Yeah, you need to be fit for that.
Oh, yes.
Another geographical feature you'll find there are moors. Not moros that once conquered Spain, not that type of moor, but M-O-O-R-S with a small m. They're areas of remote, uncultivated land. Very often they're high up, not necessarily, but often you'll find them at altitude. So you'll find plenty of moors in the Lake District. A place where you'll find even more moors, of course, is Dartmoor in the southwest of England. But the Lake District also has plenty of moors and, of course, lakes. You may have heard of the Romantic poet William Wordsworth, one of the most famous poets in the history of English literature. Well, he lived in the area, and the area often featured in his lyrical poetry. So it has moved him and many other writers to write beautiful poetry and beautiful lines about this very, very pretty area of England, which I would love to visit.
Apparently there are lots of lovely bed and breakfasts in the area, so if that's an area you'd like to visit, I think they might tend to be a little bit expensive because of where they are, but certainly if you want to wake up and have an English breakfast looking out over the moors and the lovely countryside of the Lake District, then that's a lovely trip to do. My next choice is the Galapagos National Park, which is located off the coast, which means near to the coast of Ecuador. Now, we spoke about Ecuador back in episode 254, and we did mention this park. If you want to hear more about the country of Ecuador, go to inglespodcast.com/254. And this national park was established in 1959, and it's famous partly because in 1831, the famous British naturalist Charles Darwin set off for the islands aboard his ship, the HMS Beagle. And that phrasal verb I use, to set off, means to begin a journey. And of course, Darwin's theory of evolution is very, very famous. Now, 97% of these islands are a national park, and the sea surrounding the islands is also a marine reserve. And in this marine reserve, you can see the only ocean swimming lizard. So I've got two kinds of lizards in my list. The Galapagos marine iguana you can find swimming around the islands of the Galapagos. I wonder if a marine iguana is like a really hardcore marine with a tough basic training.
I just hope it doesn't bite you and leave you to die like a Komodo. Can you imagine? You're swimming and you get bitten in the middle of the sea?
Well, I wonder if a marine iguana carries a gun, like a Navy SEAL. Ooh, yes, sir. Most of the animals are fearless. You see, marines, fearless, marine iguanas, and most of the animals allow visitors to get up close. And of course, they have the lovely giant turtles, the sea turtles, and some amazing fauna, flowers, wildlife, birds. So I'd love to visit that part of the world and spend some time with the animals.
Can I add a little bit of trivia to that? Information which I have gleaned. To glean information is to get it from somewhere. From my hours spent watching wildlife documentaries.
I had no idea you watched so many.
Not so much now, but when I was younger, I was a real fan.
David Attenborough.
David Attenborough, fantastic. David Attenborough is a very famous British naturalist, and he appears on TV a lot. He's been appearing on TV for about 50 years, very long career, and he knows a lot about the Galapagos. It may have been on one of his series that I found out that the creatures which live to the oldest age in the world live in the Galapagos.
The turtles.
The tortoises, yeah. Not the turtles.
Tortoises.
Yeah. We better tell the listeners the difference, because in Spanish it's the same word, but it isn't in English.
Tortuga.
Yeah, for both of them. But a tortoise lives on land, a turtle lives in the sea.
Right.
You use the same word in Spanish. But I'm talking about the ones that live on the land. Yeah, the Galapagos tortoise is the creature which lives the longest. I think, certainly a few years ago, I may be wrong now, but a few years ago, there was a tortoise on the Galapagos Islands still alive, which Darwin would have known.
Really?
They know that as a fact. Yeah, they can identify it. And it may still be alive today. And Darwin would have known that specific tortoise.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Back to 1831. Wow. What's your next one, Reza?
My next one is quite near the Galapagos. It's the Iguazu National Park. So we're staying in Latin America because it's located on the border of Argentina and Brazil. And it's called the Iguazu National Park because it's home, of course, to the world-famous Iguazu Falls. And Iguazu translates as Great Water. This is a huge semicircle waterfall, and it pours into both countries, into Argentina and to Brazil. So it's on the border. Apart from the amazing spectacle of this really impressive waterfall, there are about 2,000 plant and some 400 bird species that can be found in the Atlantic forest, which is in the area. As well as that, there are wild cats. Now, what's a wild cat? It's not a cat.
Very angry, livid.
It's not that. Yeah, it might be, could be. It's not a cat in somebody's flat that got really angry. A wild cat is an animal which lives in the wild. So obviously we're saying this word wild and wildlife, wilderness a lot. So a wild cat, well, it could include, for example, a jaguar, which is what you find in Iguazu. Also ocelots. So lions, tigers, all of those, they're wildcats. But the two which you find in Iguazu are jaguars and ocelots.
Is an ocelot a cat? I've never heard that word.
Yes, it's a wildcat. I'm not that familiar with them, but I know you find them in South America.
So there are lots of ocelots there.
Lots of ocelots. Not easy for you to say. And as well as the wildcats, you've got howler monkeys, which I can only guess are monkeys which like to howl.
Ow!
Can you imagine the howler monkeys? That's what they call. And the very rare, not easy to find, broad-snouted caiman.
That's like a crocodile.
So similar to a crocodile, yeah. And a snout is an animal's nose. So presumably it has a wide nose. It is broad-snouted. And another thing which I'd love to see, because it must be really, really odd, really weird, is a giant anteater. Have you ever seen an anteater on a documentary?
On a documentary, yes, but not in real life.
So it's that animal which has a really, really long snout, a really long nose, and it sucks up the ants like a vacuum cleaner through the nose. You can find them in Iguazu National Park. And one of the great things about that park is you can visit it on foot. You can walk through it. Hopefully you don't come across a jaguar while you're walking, but apart from that, I'd be happy to go there on foot. What about you?
That is the one I've been to. I was lucky enough to go to the Iguazu Falls, and it is beautiful. You walk through the park first. There's a long trek that takes you to the falls, so it kind of culminates, which means it ends at the falls, and then you go back. So it's a beautiful walk. I didn't see any jaguars, ocelots, or anteaters, but I did see lots of monkeys. And of course, lots of lovely plants and other animals. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful place to see.
Did the monkeys howl?
I don't remember them howling, but they made like monkey noises, but not particularly like a wolf, like ow. No, I didn't hear that. But definitely recommend going to see that park. It's beautiful.
And Craig, what's your next choice on our list?
Well, actually, it's my last choice. Number 10 is the Ang Phang Nga, and I probably pronounced that completely wrong, National Park in Thailand. Now, Thailand is one of my favourite countries. I absolutely love Thailand for the culture, the food, the people. I think it's a wonderful place, but I've never been to the south. And in the Phang Nga province in southern Thailand, actually not far from Malaysia, quite close to the Malaysian border, there's a national park, and it's very popular for, among other things, its limestone tower islands. Now, do you remember the James Bond film from 1974, The Man with the Golden Gun? I think it was with Christopher Lee.
Not only can I remember it, but I can picture the scene perfectly where electronically a shutter opens.
Yes.
And there's like a laser gun or something like that. And there's these beautiful naturally formed rock columns sticking out of the sea. I remember it very well. Is it there?
Yes. Those scenes were filmed in the Phang Nga province in that area. So I'd love to see those limestone towers. Of course, limestone is a very soft rock that gets eroded. To erode means to wear away, to cut into. So the wind and the weather and the sea wears away or erodes this limestone rock to create these beautiful towers that then get covered in green seaweed and moss. And it's really, really pretty. And you can explore it by kayak, which is like a canoe. Apart from these lovely limestone towers, you can see some beautiful, untouched, pristine beaches. There are caves, there are reptiles, and the largest area of native mangrove forest remaining in Thailand. So you can paddle around in your kayak in and out of these trees that kind of grow out of the rivers and the estuary going into the country. So it's just very, very unusual landscape, very unique. Do you know why you should never start a fire in a kayak?
Why not?
Because you can't have your kayak and heat it too.
Oh, that's a groaner.
You better explain that.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. You can't have your cake and
pastel.
eat it. Yeah, is an expression. You can't have your cake and eat it means you can't have one thing and the other thing which contradicts it.
You can't have everything.
You can't have everything, exactly. So Craig was playing with the pronunciation of kayak and heat. It sounds a bit like cake and eat. Very, very droll, very droll.
You can't have your kayak and heat it too. What's your last choice, Reza?
Well, my last choice is about as far away as you can possibly get from anywhere. We got to go down to the southern tip of the South Island of New Zealand. We're going to Fjordland National Park. You might not think from the name that it would be in New Zealand. To be honest, I was surprised at the name myself. I knew I wanted to go to that area of New Zealand, but I only discovered recently that it was called Fjordland. That surprised me. Have you been there, Craig?
I have been to New Zealand. I have not been to this particular area because I went when it was winter there and it was impossible to get there because the ice had frozen over the south part of the island.
So it's one of the largest national parks in the world, actually, and it's renowned, that means it's very well known, for its incredible natural beauty, and it's called Fjordland because it's made up of 14 fjords. Now, what is a fjord? Not a ford, a fjord, because there's another word in English which is ford, not the car, but a ford across a river is a place where you can walk across a river or a stream, so there's not much water. But we're not talking about that word, F-O-R-D. We're talking about a fjord, which is F-J-O-R-D, or it can also be written F-I-O-R-D. A fjord is a U-shaped glacier-carved valley. So it's a valley, and it's been made because a glacier, a huge piece of ice, has been there in the past and it's melted and you're left now with this U shape, and then it's been flooded by the sea. So a fjord has seawater, so it's like a valley but filled with seawater. That's the scientific geological explanation for fjords, but according to the Maori, who are the original inhabitants, the indigenous inhabitants of New Zealand. Their folklore, their history, explains the feature as the handiwork of a giant stonemason called Tute Rakehwanoa. My pronunciation, I'm sure, is not very good. If anybody can speak Maori, would you please correct me? So a stonemason is a professional who works with stone. They carve stone. So in their folklore, it was a giant stonemason who formed these 14 fjords. So you've got the natural beauty and you've got wildlife as well as very rare flightless birds. You could probably guess that means birds which cannot fly.
Like the kiwi, the national bird of New Zealand.
Exactly. And that's not the only type. There are several types of flightless birds in New Zealand, and you can find them there in the Fjordland National Park. There's other wildlife, and there's breathtaking waterfalls. There's underwater caves, and you can find ominous mountains. Ominous is like they're very imposing. There they are, looking down at you. You know, ominous. They're this big, beautiful mountain, and all these features, they abound. The verb abound, A-B-O-U-N-D, means that they're everywhere. There is an abundance. They abound. So those are the reasons why I would love to visit Fjordland National Park in New Zealand.
Remember, if you'd like to read the notes that we have for these 10 national parks, you can find the show notes over at inglespodcast.com/378. And that's our 10. But of course, there are many other national parks we'd love to visit. But of course, we have to limit our list to 10. What other places interest you that you'd like to see, Reza, apart from the 10 we've mentioned?
Well, whenever I looked at the list, I thought, oh my goodness, we haven't put the Serengeti. Who hasn't heard of the Serengeti? Mm-hmm. But I must admit, although it impresses me, I didn't know as much about that as the others. And it would definitely be number 11 on my list. So it's just off the list, but it's, I'm sure, equally beautiful and as impressive as the rest. Serengeti in Tanzania, in Venezuela, Canaima. In Canada, you mentioned a couple in the United States, but if we go a bit further north, you've got the very impressive Banff National Park, which I believe is far, far more remote even than the parks in North America. There are vast areas where there's absolutely nobody for like hundreds of miles. You got Torres del Paine in Chile. Can you think of any others?
There's Corcovado in Costa Rica. There's a one in Croatia. I think it's called Plitvice, something like that. That's really interesting because I've never been to Croatia. And Wadi Rum, which is in Jordan. I think that's where Petra is, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's some lovely parks in India. There's the Kaziranga in India. There's the Kakadu in Australia. And of course, many, many more. The list is endless. But I'd really like to thank Carolina for suggesting the topic. We enjoyed doing the research for this episode. And we hope you've enjoyed it too. But now it's time for you to practice your English. We've spoken enough, so we think you should speak and practice your English with us. Send us a voice message. Go to speakpipe.com/inglespodcast and leave us a voice message. Tell us your name, where you're from, and maybe an idea or a suggestion for a future episode. Reza, where can people send their emails to?
If you want to write to us, why not send an email to craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
You are more than welcome to visit the online store on the Mansion Ingles website. Go to store.mansioningles.net, and there you will see a selection of paid courses and material to help you improve your English. And before we go out the door and say goodbye, thank you to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. If you would like to join our Patreon program, you can for as little as $1.20 per month. That's including VAT, value added tax. And if you join the program, you get instant access to recent transcriptions. For more information, go to Patreon, patreon.com/inglespodcast. Ingles podcast. The link to that, as always, in the show notes. Reza, who are the latest supporters to have joined our Patreon program?
A big thanks to the newcomers, who are Edgar Velandia, Ricardo Sendulski, Diana Carolina Martinez Mende, Floriano Blanco Rodriguez, and Isaac Baena Garcia.
Thank you to you and to all of our Patreon supporters. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen to us. On next week's episode, we are looking at 8 more common colloquial expressions, so part 4 of our colloquial expressions series. Until then, thank you very much for listening this week. It's goodbye from Reza.
And it's goodbye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.